Nobody cares about what you're trying to tell them, and they especially don't care what you're trying to sell them. Nobody wants to watch your commercial or visit your website. Almost every advertisement that anybody has ever seen has been against their will. I was laughing almost hysterically. And now, mind you, this was also while I was at like 104-degree fever, having the flu. So there's a bit of hysteria in there, but there's also, it's one of those gut punches of truth and reality that I don't know if a lot of people, that once you get on the advertising side, once you get on the marketing side, it can be very, you can kind of fall in love with your own ideas and your own message and your own product and your own services. And I think that this was a brilliant way to kind of simply cut through that. And perfectly with your book, simply put, there's so many poignant just darts that are thrown out there, and this is one of the negative ones. It was very well done. Can you explain a little bit more about what went behind this kind of thought when you were writing this down?
Oh yeah, so my background, I ran a marketing agency for 10 years, right? And one thing that happens when you spend that much time or more in the marketing space, the advertising space, is you start to talk to other people in the advertising space, and they're all so obsessed with the thing that they're working on. They're like, oh, this is a great ad we have. It's going to run in the Super Bowl. It's going to be awesome. And everybody's going to care about it. And you see that with the clients too. They say, well, we have this wonderful product. Everybody's going to care about it because I care a lot about it. But the reality is nobody woke up today with their to-do list saying, I got to go click on some banner ads. I got to go open some spam emails. I got to go, tap through some ads on Instagram. Nobody wants to do that stuff. We do that stuff because, well, it's what's kind of getting in the way of the other things that we want to do for the most part. And sometimes there's relevance in advertising for sure. I mean, you're connecting producers and consumers, the whole kind of like original definition of marketing. There's nothing bad about that. But it's important to have that level of humility in the work that you're doing, because if you don't, well, then you're just talking to yourself instead of talking to the audience that you need to reach.
That's absolutely true. And understanding that from Jump Street is so important. I love throughout the book, you bring in this analogy of the drill and the hole. And I think that is a perfect analogy when you're considering exactly what you're talking about and how to wrap up this idea of a simple message. And I definitely want to dive into what makes a message simple and why is it, I guess before we go into what makes a message simple, why is it so important that we simplify that marketing message? One, we stop thinking about it just like you were just talking about. We stop thinking about it from the perspective of ourselves and our project and what it is that we're providing, and we think about it from the potential client, the potential customer's perspective. But why then, like, if I can explain this in a way that highlights the benefits to the customer and not the features that I love in my product so much, why not go on and on and on about this and tell them all of these amazing things? Why do I have to keep this simple, Ben?
Oh yeah, so I'll back up from that into the kind of foundational piece of why simple is important. So if you strip away everything and you just say there's two parties in this kind of communication transaction, there's the senders and there's receivers. The senders can be the advertisers, the marketers, the entrepreneurs, advocates, politicians, teachers, whatever you want to say. And then the receivers are the other end, the voters, the donors, the buyers, the students. That is the receiving kind of bucket. And we all wear both of these hats all the time. But when we're wearing the receiver hat, most of how we perceive communication comes down to this idea of fluency. And we know the word fluency, right? Like we can be fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin or cooking or motorcycles or whatever it is that we're interested in, we're fluent in. When things are easy, they're fluent. That's the root of the word actually is flowing in Latin. So that's what it kind of feels like. But when you ask a cognitive scientist about the word fluency, well, that describes a whole host of experiences that loosely translate to take something that's easy to take from out in the world, stick in your head, and make sense of. And so the easier it is to do that in the perception and the processing of things out in the world, well, we're more likely to like them, we're more likely to trust them, we're likely to buy them, all the good things, right? And the other end of the spectrum is also true too, which is, well, when things take a lot of work, when they're complicated, when they take, extra kind of brain cycles and stress to work through and to understand, well, we don't like them, we don't trust them, we don't buy them. And that's obviously not what we want. And so there's this gap here, because what we want as receivers is something to be simple and fluent, but when we're senders, well, we have a lot of things pushing us and pulling us in the other direction. So, internally we have factors like our additive bias. Externally, we're in systems and structures that want us to add more, and often also we kind of want to hide behind, frankly, the complication. So that's the gap. That's what we're trying to fill between senders and receivers. Why is it that communication can fail? And so what you're alluding to when you're talking about the features and benefits a little bit, that's the first piece of the puzzle of how we can get these two sides closer together. My background is in design, and when we look at a problem, well, design is about arranging things in the world to achieve a goal. And I look at this as saying, okay, well, we have these 5 design principles that we can use to help us get there. And the first one is beneficial, and that's exactly what you're talking about. What does it matter to the receiver? What's in it for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I love these 5 principles. They really, the way, even the order in which you lay them out, and we're going to go into each one of them here today. Right before we do, just to reemphasize the point that you were just making, there was another brilliant stat that you added in there into the book, and it says we take 11 million bits of information into our brains every single second. And so, quick audio poll, to the audience. What percentage of that do you think that we attend to? Like, how much are we actually paying attention to? How much are we actually bringing in? Is it 4%? Is it 0.4%? It's actually, and this is how good I'm at math, I just have to count out the zeros. So it's 0.0004% is how much of that information we can attend. And you have to think about it. If it's 11 million bits of information every single second, I mean, in here right now, I have the screen with you in front of me. I have the camera. I've got the lights. I've got my own picture of me. Sarah's in the background, tripping the light. Fantastic. All of these things are happening. And how much am I attending to? Now, I'm not attending to the fact that my shoes are tied and how tightly they're tied. Now I am, because I'm talking about it. But yeah, and so that's interesting for me. And especially when it goes to, like, you dive a little bit further in and going into why, like, how is that 0.0004% chosen? Is it random? Is it just like, okay, that's what sparks up? And sure, that's a part of it, but there's a large part of biasing towards things that I'm actually interested in / that are easy to perceive, right? That are easy to understand. Because, I mean, if we think about it from like the pure marketing perspective, and you're a business and you're trying to get a persuasive message in front of somebody and have it actually land and stick and they walk around with it. Like, it can't, most of the things that you're trying to sell are not needs. They're not at that baseline, like, I have to get this. That's the reason you don't see really commercials for, like, gasoline. Like, you're going to buy it. It's just going to happen, Yep. And so that's not really there. And so for everything else, like, it all comes down to, and I actually love how you tied in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how this is a baseline point for finding out which level of need. But on the physiological and the safety level, there's a lot of businesses are not operating or not selling from that position. And so if it's complicated and I don't need it to survive, you're going to get lost in the sauce with everybody else. And so I think that that's understanding the context of the amount of information we have coming in is crucially important.
And
But
and what you're
please.
just sorry 1 second. I was going to say what you're alluding to with that kind of the hierarchy of needs and stuff is what we're talking about, the benefits, right? So the number one sentence. So I teach marketing at Baruch College as well, and the number one sentence I tell my students there, and I say, if you remember nothing else from this entire degree, from this entire course, if you internalize this, you're going to be so far ahead of everybody else. And it's not mine. It comes from Theodore Levitt, is a Harvard professor from the 60s. He said, people don't want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. Right? They don't want the thing. They want what the thing does for them. So this is the features versus benefits, right? If you've ever worked in sales or marketing, this might be kind of the 101 piece here. People don't want the thing. They want how the thing makes them better, makes them happier, makes them healthier, whatever it is that they're getting to. And if you interrogate that a few levels down, you can start to go from, well, what is the feature? What is the functional benefit, kind of the tangible piece? What's the emotional benefit? How does it make me feel? And then ultimately at the end, which is you start to say, so what? And you say, well, it gets you down to those needs, those Maslow's needs that we've seen a million times in textbooks and presentations. That's how we can get from, mint toothpaste, mint flavored in your toothpaste, all the way down to, like love and belonging by saying, well, I don't want the mint flavor. Well, so what? Well, that means the reason there's the feature of the mint flavor is because it's going to give me fresh breath. Okay, that's the functional benefit. Well, so what? Well, I don't actually even want the fresh breath. I want to have a more successful date tonight. Okay, that's the emotional benefit. And they say, so what? Well, that is maybe the love and belonging need or the physiological need that I have. And so you can connect these things that are tangible in the real world, like the features, to what actually motivates us to make decisions and to make choices by just kind of asking a very simple question over and over again.
Right. I love it. I've always called this, whenever I work with clients or whenever I've done it with myself in my own business, like the 5 or the 7 whys, question is just ask why, or like, so what, just like you said. If you do that why or so what, and you do that 5 times deep, you do it 7 times deep, and you're going to get to the core root of what it is that we're getting at, and what like the principle, the base, the most base need. And I really do love that you brought in the hierarchy of needs, because when people think about attaching things with needs, a lot of times the knee-jerk response is to go to those physiological needs, like, oh, well, I need to sleep, I need to, I need a place to rest, I need, food and water and sex and things like that. And so, but then you go above and beyond to these different hierarchical categories of needs, and then you really get a feel for, where your product fits into that niche or into each category. And it's extremely powerful when you're trying to make that deeper connection and trying to cut through all of that noise. With and so real quick, just to follow up on the 1/4-inch drill and the 1/4-inch hole, I loved the image, the illustration in the book there that kind of was like, here's the ad that could or would be used in place of it. And so I think it was a picture. It was like a picture of a family that was going to go up onto a wall, or something along those lines, where it's basically like this, you're not buying a drill, you're buying a place for memories. You're buying a place to be able to put up memories.
Well, that's basically saying, okay, well, how we got to something like that is by saying, well, the feature of the drill might be that it has a longer battery life. But we don't really buy a longer battery life. We buy being able to work longer about stopping and to get things done. And by being that's the benefit of the longer battery life. Well, if I can get things done, that means I can get my hallway gallery wall up sooner. And then if I get that up sooner, I can see the photos of my family quicker, right? And then I'm going to be able to have, the family memories more visible. And so you can connect any sort of feature. You can ultimately interrogate it down to, well, why is it that we want this thing? Why is it better for us? And this doesn't mean, by the way, that you never talk about features, and that you never talk about some of the lower level benefits. You have to invest accordingly, right? So you mentioned the whys, the 5 whys. That's like an operations model from Toyota, famously. I think it was in the 80s or 70s. I forget what it was.
Kaizen.
Yeah, and so if there's a problem on like the factory floor or something, goes wrong, well, they ask why, and then why, and then why, and then why, and then why, and every time they invest accordingly at solving different problems. Where we do a big fix at the beginning, when we do a smaller fix at the top, or whatever it is that needs to be addressed. That's kind of the message here too, which is that sometimes, depending on the environment, if you're in like a technical sales meeting with like a CTO and you're working on figuring out how do you get your piece of software sold? Well, yeah, you're not going to lead that conversation with the big emotional impact, but you will eventually get to the features, and maybe we need to go a little bit into the benefits. But we're talking about this kind of top of the funnel, first contact, like consumer based stuff. The closer you can get to why people make decisions, these motivations, the better you're going to be at whatever it is you want to do. If it's informing, persuading, selling, that's going to connect a lot more effectively.
That makes sense. It's like a magnet. Like you're throwing like a particularly flavored magnet that's going to pull in your target, your audience, and you have to understand. And that's why in this series that we've done here, we started with identifying your target market. Because once you understand them, you understand the value proposition that we talked about next. And so we understand the unique promise of value that your business is providing while in the face of competition and everything else. And then we look at, getting people to act, but the question, the reason that I was so excited and that I am so excited that you're here is about getting that message clear. And I think the one last thing that I wanted to hit before we kind of dive into the attributes of a simple message is the idea of this kind of marketing equation of this balance back and forth between the vessel of communication and the content of communication. And so I think a lot of businesses get wrapped up around the axle when it comes to the vessel, when it comes to, okay, what's the mechanism? How am I delivering this? Like, okay, well, I'm going to be on billboards, or I'm going to focus purely on digital marketing. And in digital marketing, I'm going to put 80% of that effort into social media. And it's like, okay, so they spend all this time and energy getting to understand and learn the dynamics and the algorithms and how they work and how to use the built-in advertising software for Meta or for Google or for YouTube or whatever the case may be. And they spend all this time investing in there, and then they create these ads and they put them out, and they are wondering why, like, yes, they're getting some success, but they're not getting nearly the success that they thought was possible. And a lot of that comes back to how much time and energy did you invest putting into figuring out what to put into that vessel? Like, you understand the road. You understand that the road is made out of bricks, but you didn't really think about, the package that you're bringing with you. It's like you forgot your briefcase on the way to work.
This happens all the time when you deal with clients, is that really I deal with students. Anybody who is not doing kind of like marketing or creative on a day-to-day basis, they think that marketing is, I bought a billboard, right? And I bought Facebook ads for it. And to an extent, I mean, you go buy a billboard, you slap your logo on it, it's not going to do nothing, right? It's at least kind of the thinnest level of awareness, but it's not really telling anybody anything about why it is to choose you. That's kind of the vessel is the billboard, the vessel is the Facebook ad or the email or TikTok or QR codes or whatever other the tool is of the moment. And we often think this is the biggest challenge I see in marketing and digital marketing, which is where I spend a lot of my time, is that everybody thinks the next new thing is a magic pill, right? I do this thing and everything's going to work. If our company just gets on Facebook, it'll work. If our company just gets on Instagram, it'll work. If our company just gets on Snapchat, it'll work. If it just gets on TikTok, if it just gets on whatever the next thing is, that's going to be our plan. It reminds me a little bit of, I'm speaking to you from Queens here. We have a house up in the Catskills, and on the way there, I drive past this billboard every time, and there's this big black and white billboard, and it says like John Doe, certified public accountant, and that's it. That's the entire. It's not an old sign. It's like a new sign, and it's like John Doe, CPA, and I'm like, I want to find this guy and ask him how much it's been working for them, because it is in many ways very salient. It's very noticeable and different because it's so plain, but
Right.
you're not putting any messaging there. So there's no phone number, there's no email address, there's no reason why John Doe is the best. There's no like talking about the need. That's just using the
There's
like,
literally
I got
no
a
way to
billboard
get hold of me.
marketing. Yeah, right. It's a very funny thing.
That is incredible. And that I think that's a really good segue into diving into breaking down these different attributes. Because you start off with beneficial. So when you're crafting and you're taking this message, and so you're figuring out what to put into that briefcase that you're going to throw in the car with you to actually go take it into a vessel, that's going to go take it to deliver this to your target audience. You have to figure out how to craft it. It's not going to be a 72-page sales letter. It needs to be simplified, and you have the 5 attributes of a simple message, and it starts off, like we just said, with beneficial. And so the note that I took here was, simple messages prioritize the receiver. They focus on the receiver's goals, needs, and desires. And so with that, what's some more depth? What's maybe some examples of a beneficial style message that companies use or that they could use when they're thinking about their audience and how to deliver that message?
Oh yeah. So one of the most kind of famous examples, and it's funny, I hate using Apple as an example because they're such like a big behemoth, and I actually ban my students from using them as an example because it's good to talk about other stuff, but people get it immediately, right? And so about 20 years ago, Apple introduces a new product. They're kind of on the ropes a little bit. They're not doing too hot. Steve Jobs is back, but they're not the biggest company in the world they are today. They introduced a product, an MP3 player, and they call it the iPod. And everybody else, there were MP3 players otherwise. They were on the market, and they had, some of them had hard drives, some of them were, memory cards, and they had, all these little features, and maybe they had a radio, whatever it is. But all the marketing about MP3 players was, we have this many megabytes, we have this many gigabytes, we have this many, buttons and headphone jacks and whatever else it is. Apple comes out when they introduce the iPod and they say, it's 1,000 songs in your pocket. Right? It's 1,000 songs in your pocket. They're not going out and listing the tech specs in their advertisement. They're saying, well, what's in it for you? What does 4 gigabytes mean? What does 8 gigabytes mean? It means that you have 1,000 songs in your pocket. You don't have to carry around a giant book of CDs or whatever else you were doing. And this is kind of the clearest example of this. But again, this happens all the time. I mean, we can look at you can look outside of marketing. You can look into politics. You can look into this, into that. We ultimately, in every scenario, is that we don't buy the thing. We don't care about the thing. We actually care about the problem that we have, and that's why I'm doing this. If you've ever done anything in positioning, so this is this other kind of marketing term, and that it basically boils down to 3 questions. You can hire an agency and they'll do positioning, and you can go sit down with people and eventually develop a statement and a book and this and that. But basically, it's just asking yourself 3 questions, which is, who is your stuff for? What's your market? Well, what problem do they have that you're solving? And then finally, why are you the best at solving it? Why are you the best possible? And the amount of times I will talk to clients or people who have been working in a business for decades maybe, and they don't understand this about their own work, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, you can sit around a table of people that have been dedicating their whole careers to something, and they don't have a clear answer to it. But actually, sometimes it's because somebody has been somewhere for so long that it's easy to kind of lose track of that, because that stuff kind of exists like up here at the top level, but the details exist in the light of day every single day, right? Every single day I wake up and say, I got to go deal with this, distributor that's giving me a pain in the ass. That's not why people are buying things. Who are they? What problem do you have? And why are you the best at solving it? If you can figure those things out, it will put you, no pun intended, in a position to be able to do everything else a lot easier.
There's a reason that they use the word.
Yeah.
No, it's true. And that is often where that is exactly where I begin with people that are even at the ideation phase. They're like, I think I want to, I have an idea. I want to start this bakery. And I'm like, that's amazing. Do you have an idea where you want to start it? And they tell me, and then I'm like, okay, how many other bakeries are there around there? And they're like, oh, there's a bunch. And I'm like, okay, well, why is yours different? We know, we can get to the people that you're serving. We can look at the community and we get through these things. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you stand out? What makes you different? So that's definitely that can definitely be a challenge, and it's something that a lot of people don't consider. They fall in love and with their passion project, and they want to turn their passion project into a business, and then they just assume, like we talked about before, that their passion is felt by the people that they're going to be serving at the same way. And it's like, it's not. Otherwise, they'd be trying to start a bakery too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one example that I wanted to pull out too, in addition, on the beneficial side, and I love that you put this in there because I'm a 12-year Army vet. And so this struck a particular chord because I was there during that transition between the be all that you can be versus an army of one, and looking at the difference between what's a beneficial oriented message versus what is an unbeneficial, and the beneficial being, of course, be all that you can be, because it's looking at the person and how they're going to be able to grow and expand into the person that they, with all of the potential possible, versus being an army of one. We're like, okay, come lose yourself into the group and you're not going to have an identity.
Exactly. Be all you can be. It's talking about when you interrogate it, you get down to that self-actualization need, right? And that's a very powerful one. So yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that when we're talking about benefits here, if, I say that this is not a kind of like step-by-step thing between these 5 principles, that it's not like a rubric or something. But it's a little bit of a lie, because if you get the benefits right, that's important to do first. And that's, if you're only going to do one thing, get the benefits right. And then the other half lie about that is that minimal being at the end, and we can talk more about these other principles. Minimal being at the end is also a little bit intentional, because it's about everything you need, but only what you need. And it's hard to know that unless you've gone through and interrogated your messaging through these other lenses.
When I saw minimal was at the end, I was so excited, just because I understood the importance. It's almost like minimal is built into the idea of this being simple, right? Simple has this intrinsic, stepbrother that's concise, that's minimal, that's as small as it needs to be. But it's like the fact that you have this as the 5th attribute, and it's at the end, it's this reminder that's like, hey, we just did these things, and you saw all these different examples of short, messages throughout the book from each attribute. You might be stacking them together and turning this into something a little bit longer. So this is our final reminder. Hey. So I really appreciated the way that you positioned, especially just like you said, the benefits at the beginning and the minimalism at the very end. But it's shifting into the next one. We're looking at focused messaging. So talk to us about what you mean by focused. What is maybe an example of an unfocused message, and why is this so relevant? Why does this come up as number 2?
Oh yeah. So to kind of cheat a little bit real quick. So we have beneficial at the beginning, we have minimal at the end. We're talking about focus. The next 2 are salient and empathetic. So by focused, what we're talking about is, are you trying to say one thing, or are you trying to say multiple things at once? And is it one idea, or is it 3 ideas in a trench coat, right? The idea here is that a lot of things in life are not zero sum, but attention in many ways is, right? We can only pay attention to one thing at a time. Priority is singular, right? We like to think we can multitask, that we can process different streams of information, but we just can't. I mean, it's been pretty well proven across a bunch of different disciplines. And this butts heads with how we often will create messaging, especially in a group setting, and even more so in an unstructured group setting. If you've ever sat around in like a student club or a ad hoc committee at work or whatever, in between, they all fall into the same trap, which I call the Frankenstein idea. So if you read Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's book, how she describes the monster is that the individual pieces are beautiful. The hair is lustrous, and the eyes are these pearly whites, big muscles, and all these pieces were chosen for their individual qualities. But when you put them together, it's this gruesome composite that is worse than the sum of its parts, and it's the monster, right? That same thing happens in a lot of creative, like brainstorm, creative generation sessions, because there might not be creative leadership that's able to kind of do the unsexy work of editing. So what happens is you get in the meeting, somebody says, well, we're going to throw out NFTs, we're going to throw out QR codes and drones and influencers and AI thing, and everything gets like duct taped together into this one hideous beast of a proposal. And there's three hashtags somehow and two different spokespeople, and it goes out and it just completely falls flat. Because even though any one of the individual items inside of that composite, that gruesome beast, can be beautiful, can be great, putting them together in a message can often pull you in the opposite direction, can sink the entire ship. I see this in my class. This is the perfect breeding ground for this because those are inherently unstructured groups. And I ask them I give them a brand every semester. I say, hey, go out and make a pitch for brand X or Y or Z. And they come back, and no matter how much I give them the warning for this, somebody's going to come back, and because they did their work last minute, whatever it was, and they're going to come back, and it's going to be this Frankenstein idea where I'm sitting there with my other judges that I bring in, and we're like, we really liked X. We really like this piece of it. But we also like this other piece. And we also have if you only told us one of these pieces, you would have won the project. But because you told us all three of these things, it's kind of muddied. It's no longer clear. And that ends up hurting the efficacy of any of our creative ideas or of our communication.
Yeah, I worked directly. I was just working with a client recently who was running into this problem because he sells a multitude of men's health products, and they're great, but they had these kind of different categories. They serve these different purposes, and so I really worked in. I was like, these shouldn't be. Don't try to force this into one like advertising campaign. Like, you need to figure out, okay, this product I have solves what problem and for who. Okay, so let's create a marketing campaign based on that and that alone. And then even within there, we don't know what's going to be most effective. Context and perspective are the most powerful things. And so if you want to see, okay, well, I'm going to keep the picture the same, but I want to create two different ads. And so I'm going to keep the picture the same, but I'm going to change the verbiage just a little bit on A and B and do this A/B testing. But that's still within this one minute category. This isn't comparing two different products against each other. It's two different marketing strategies happening simultaneously, or advertising strategies happening simultaneously, and you can figure out which one is actually getting more traction than the other. Mm-hmm. And so just keep narrowing down into those specific areas rather than trying to say, trying to fit, just like you said, trying to wrap all of these products into one and then talk about all of them in this one cohesive package out to the world. It gets lost, and you're like talking about men's health and like, okay, moving on. There's 1,000 people, there's 10,000, there's 100,000 people talking about men's health. Like, we need to get more specific. We need to get more focused. Like, what exactly are you here? What benefit are you providing? How is this helpful to my life? I'm not going to spend the time trying to figure it out. And so it's a lot of power behind the focused energy of this.
Absolutely. And so another kind of example to put this, to bring it to a slightly different place though, is, you can walk around New York City here and lots of great pizza places, lots of great bagel places, lots of great delis, lots of great, burger spots. And if you go to a pizza place and they just serve pizza, it's probably pretty good pizza. If you go to a pizza place that also has bagels both the bagels and the pizza are going to be terrible. And if they also have burgers and fried chicken and gyros and whatever else, you can pretty much guarantee that all of it's going to be bad because you're not focused on the one thing that matters. There's an inverse relationship between the flexibility, the quantity of things that you're offering, and the perceived quality of the things that you're doing.
I went to a pizza place, not in the city, somewhere. It's not worth mentioning because I'm not rude. But they served pizza, and I went there and I was like, all right, cool. And the sign on the outside was like, it's pizzeria, and I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll go in there. And then next to me, I see this person is brought out a plate, and I'm like, what did you order? And he's like, oh, lasagna. And I was like, oh,
okay.
what? All right.
That's at least a cousin, right? That's
yeah. We're family. Yeah. We're family. I'm Italian. I get it. And my very first job was at a place that did the same exact thing. So, but we also sold Philly steak sandwiches. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
But at any rate, no, it's a good point. If nothing else, it's an indicator. It's an indicator of quality of if your business is unfocused categorically, against itself. That's a really good point. So you brought up the next couple of points. So salience. This one is something that may be less intuitive to people when they initially hear it, but I think once you explain it, it makes a ton of sense, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course.
Oh yeah. So salience means, does your message stand out from the noise? Does it rise to your attention? That's what salience means. Is it contrast? Does it zig when others zag? Is it different? Is it noticeable? So how we can best achieve that in terms of breaking it down into actionable tools is often by playing by rules, embracing constraints that others aren't. And so to do something different and do something creative and unique, well, we often have to put pressure on ourselves to do something in the process to get there that's going to be a little bit different. And there's a few different ways you can do that, right? You can look at any of the attributes that affect the work that we do. If it's the time it takes us to do that, or the time of the output, if it's the space, if it is the tools that we're using. By fiddling with these levers that we have in our work, we're able to get to something that's going to be unique, that's going to contrast, that's going to stand out in the noisy sameness that we're competing against.
100%. I think one of the things that I've really appreciated here is that you explicitly talk about you have to push yourself. You have to find the edge of your comfort zone. And then salience is very frequently on the other side of that zone of comfort. There's a reason why it's comfortable, and there's a reason why being on the other side is different. It's because most people like to exist in that side of comfort. Now, I'm curious. So, how do you know? Like, so if we're operating within, I think that sphere of comfort, that comfort zone, is created by a set of kind of maybe unspoken rules and self-regulation or like marketing wide kind of accepted practices. And so, how do we take that then? How do we operate from within that and constrain those rules, I believe is what you were saying, to turn it into a different direction on its face by constraining ourselves even further? How does that? It feels counterintuitive. Can you explain a little bit more?
Oh yeah. So are you familiar with The Paradox of Choice? Have you read that book by Barry Schwartz? So
no.
So great book. It was like a behavioral economics title that came out probably about 15 years ago or so, and it made a lot of noise at the time. But I've
definitely heard of it.
Yeah, it's really good. The foundational idea behind that is that when we are choosing between kind of one thing and a million other options, we're a lot less happy than we're choosing between one thing and like two other options, right? And there's all sorts of famous studies in there. They do stuff where like they're doing like taste tests of like jams or jellies or whatever at a grocery store. And if they only laid out 3 flavors and you picked one, you're happier with it than if they had 8 flavors or 10 flavors, you picked one, you're kind of less happy with it. Because ultimately what comes down to the paradox of choice is that when we're making a choice, we are giving up the other options that we could have had. And so when there's actually more options, we're giving up more things. We feel less confident in the choice that we're doing. And if you kind of ladder that idea over to creativity, well, when we're faced with endless possibility that we can do, we have this whole big blank canvas for something. Well, actually, it ends up being a little bit of a daunting task, right? If you've ever tried to write something and you're just opening up a new document and you have the little flashing cursor in front of you, I mean, it's endless possibility, but it's also it's daunting, right?
It's a terrible feeling. I like to go with the stream of consciousness. Like, okay, if I'm at that point, I'm like, words are getting put on this page, and then I can. Once I have something to operate with, then we're good to go. But
because everything, and then when as you start creating, everything that you're doing is all of a sudden, well, I could have done something else a little bit, or this other thing. But if you start to put a little bit, not so much like a jail cell, but like a frame around what you're doing when you're looking at constraints, well, it starts to say, okay, well, this is going to push me in this direction, and now I've got kind of that first foothold. I got out of that paralysis at the beginning to do something different. But you alluded to something before, which would talk about kind of that comfort barrier. So constraints can come from an upper bound, but they can also come from a lower bound, which is so the upper bound is, hey, I need you to, we're going to develop a slogan for your product. Spit out as many things as you can in the next like 60 seconds, right? Like, you get that's one thing. Or hey, you can only do it with 100 characters, right? Like that's how long it can be. What if you did it the other way around and you said, okay, well, you need to develop a slogan for something. So we need to develop a minimum of 100 slogans before we can start thinking about choosing which one of them. And so you're going to get through some of the easy ones in the beginning, some of the obvious ones. And then as you get out into the wilderness there a little bit, as you're in, the 40th, the 50th, the 80th one, all of a sudden you're like, I'm getting some weird stuff now. Like I'm past the point where I ran out of all the usual stuff. And now I got to do some weird stuff. And that's where things can ultimately start to diverge from the norm and become salient.
Ah, that's a really powerful example of a strategy that you can use to get there. Especially like you said, looking at it from the different perspectives, from the top and from the bottom, when looking at implementing your own constraints or restraints. That's powerful. I'm keeping that nugget. Evan's holding it along with all of the rest of them. All right. And this one was particularly good because I thought it was really powerful. So just an example of salience that you had in the book is on cigarettes and tobacco, right? So I have this one that's tobacco kills 1,200 people a day. Ever think about taking a day off? So that's one versus think, don't smoke, right? And so I love this comparison because it pushes somebody outside of just the idea of like, okay, if simply put is the name of Benjamin Guttmann's book, and he's going for simple, and that's going to mean short, then think, don't smoke, obviously is going to be the right answer. It's like direct to the point. It's only 3 words. It's, it's direct and it's, authoritative. But that's not salient. So explain just real quick why the first option, why tobacco kills 1,200 people a day, ever think about taking a day off. What do you think makes that more salient versus the other?
So salience is achieved by contrast, right? And it's the figure versus the ground a lot of times. So what is that message and what is it set against? So the Philip Morris campaign, Think, Don't Smoke, was actually coming out around the same time as Court Ordered, as the Truth campaign was about 20 some odd years ago. The Think, Don't Smoke is shorter, right? It's smaller words. It's 3 quick little beats there. But when you set that, and especially when you look at the context of that ad, the whole advertisement as a message, when you set it against everything else that was on TV at the time, well, it looked like everything else. It was just teenagers hanging out in a diner, and it was a very kind of bland thing, and there was some little pop music playing in the background. And Think, Don't Smoke, it sounds a lot like other like advertising slogans that were going on. It's also a case of like pretty words. This happens a lot in marketing. Is like there's pretty words. It looks really nice somewhere on a headline on your website, but it doesn't actually really mean anything. And then when you look at the ads that Truth was doing at the time, well, it's just kind of like almost like grungy, like black and white or like toned down and handheld cameras. And there's, 1,200 body bags being set out in front of the tobacco headquarters, and there's some guy in a megaphone that says tobacco kills 1,200 people a day. Ever think about taking a day off? Well, that is strikingly different than what else was running before or after that in the campaign. And so it was noticeable, and also maybe not like the prettiest words, but it meant something in a way that think, don't smoke doesn't actually mean something. And when researchers looked at these two campaigns years later, they found out that, well, the Truth campaign actually was very effective in terms of decreasing interest in smoking amongst teenagers. The Philip Morris campaign, Think Don't Smoke, did the opposite. It actually increased attitudes towards smoking, which I guess is what Philip Morris would have wanted. But but it's not what the stated goal of the campaign was.
Right. No, it's and it's especially when you're thinking about community, you have to again think about the audience that you're communicating to, and if you're trying to convince young rebellious teens who are, being offered for their first time that can spur a lifetime of smoking, with think don't smoke, basically like the adults think that you're stupid if you do this, then and one, you're telling them outright what to do, without any sort of obvious consequence or anything of that nature. It's really, I guess it's not that much of a surprise that that's kind of the way that it went. They didn't consider who they were trying to communicate with. That's brilliant. I love it. Especially as somebody who has officially been a week off of smoking. So I'm on team clean. So then on the next one, we're looking at empathetic. And so this one caught me off guard when I saw it on the list of these. And once I read into it, I was like, okay, yeah, obviously this makes sense. But when you think about, a lot of people think about marketing, they don't think about empathy, from the perspective of trying to get your product out there, trying to increase brand awareness, trying to increase, your sales. But this goes to the idea that I think that we were talking about when it comes to understanding your customers, understanding who they are and what their priorities and values are. Maybe that kind of customer avatar worksheet. What drew you to this? What experiences did you have that made this more resonant?
So empathy is, are you speaking in a language that the audience understands, right? Are you meeting them where they are in terms of both like literal language that you're communicating in and their emotions, their motivations, their worldview? And the better you understand that, the better you're going to be able at connecting with them. This is the subtitle of this chapter is Welcome the Enlightened Idiot, right? That is a role that I would play a lot in the work that I would do, which is you go in and you talk to a client that they're so into their thing, right? They're the experts in their thing, and I'm not the expert in their thing. And I'm like, well, what are you selling? Who's your customer? And ask these kind of like dumb questions in a way, and because I didn't understand them, I was outside of my element. And by the way, enlightened idiot is as a positive, right? So enlightened means that people, someone who knows something you don't. Idiot means common man, right? So it's the outside perspective that you're trying to get. It's your audience. That's who the enlightened idiot is. And so if you're able to put that hat on, you're able to ask these kind of questions with this beginner's mindset, with this openness, that is, you're able to kind of shake somebody loose from their own internal language that might be full of jargon or acronyms or something else. And the way we do this is kind of like a no-duh thing. It's talk to your audience. Go out and talk to them. And it can be stand on the street corner. It could be call somebody up. It could be do a focus group at the high end of things. But it's also, I am betting, because I've seen it firsthand, this is the thing that people are going to do the least. This is the biggest piece of advice that people are going to ignore from this lesson, because it's awkward. People don't like to do it. It's weird conversations to have. You might get feedback you don't like. Mm-hmm. And so that's why people don't often connect as effectively, is because, well, they refuse to kind of get out of their own bubbles when they're doing so.
Is this the section of the book where you brought up the Zen Buddhist Shisham? I think is that the right?
So the beginner's mindset, right? So it's
Yes.
It gives you this kind of openness that you wouldn't have otherwise, because it gives you this perspective that the other kind of internal folks, when we're working on something, we are often we create these kind of reality distortion bubbles a lot of times, because to borrow kind of the Steve Jobs piece of it, is that we use our own language. We work with people who are also really into the thing we're working on. We're selling to people that they really care about. All these things force us into a place where we're really kind of unable sometimes to connect with outsiders. There's a name for this phenomenon, which is the false consensus effect. And researchers have been studying this for a long time. What happens is we like to think that we're representative of the norm, of the population, of whoever. And so let's say my favorite flavor is mint chip ice cream. Well, I'm going to say, well, I'm a pretty normal guy, so everybody else probably likes mint chip ice cream. Maybe some people like chocolate or vanilla, but it's probably mint chip. Well, in reality, it's probably the opposite, right? It's probably that most people like chocolate, some people like mint chip, some people like cookie dough, whatever it's going to be. But we like to think that not just our ice cream flavors, but our political leanings, our motivations, our consumer preferences, that they're broadly representative, when often they're far from it.
100%. It's such a good point that we get lost in our own head, and especially even just the understanding of the product, which is why working through these attributes is so critical, because you operate, and you brought this up and it reminded me of something that I talk about all the time. And it's this, what I refer to as this mental gray space. And what that is a place where I understand something so deeply and meaningfully within myself that if somebody came up and asked me to define it, I would actually have a hard time saying the words because of how intimate my own information or familiarity is with that thing. Like if somebody was like, why do you love your wife? And I'm like, that answer exists in a gray space. It's in this kind of unspoken, not as many words. And then I can go down this list of things that, we've heard comedians say in the past that end up sounding a lot like a dog. When you go through like a list of like, she's always so happy to see me when we get back together, and she's so loyal and all of these things. And you're like, yeah, okay, well, this could be an attribute of many other things that's not your partner for life, and doesn't exhibit necessarily the attributes of love. And so I think it's something that it's very helpful to have a process to get yourself out of that, and understanding that part of the process, part of the built-in nature of this process, and if you go through these attributes when creating your message, part of it is that you're going to feel very uncomfortable. And part of it, and just understanding that like to anticipate that those moments are going to come and to embrace them when they do come, because that's part of the process. It's just part of it. It's just like going and working out. Like, yeah, it doesn't feel great, but afterwards it feels amazing. And after you do it a bunch, then it feels even better. And it's the same. There's a reason why when we do difficult things, there's this greater sense of euphoria, endorphin dumps, and what have you at the end of it, because they're so difficult to do. And so this is one of those psychologically difficult things, like you were saying, that people will most likely avoid because they don't want to push this out there. It's very interesting because basically you're saying to test the waters before you spend the money. And maybe you have to spend a little bit of money to test the waters, but people want to test the waters with like with their final project. So instead of turning your paper in, use another analogy, instead of turning your paper in and for like a free reading submission, like a review, that's like, oh, how did I do? Let's see before I turn in this 90% of my grade for the semester. They're like, no, I'm just going to turn it in. Like I'm just turning in final, first draft, rough, when you have the opportunity to reach out. So from your perspective, what kind of strategies can people use to actually accomplish this? I mean, they can reach out to like friends and family and things of that nature. But if they want a little bit more curated survey audience, what tools exist right now that people could use to test out these different ideas?
Well, what really matters a lot is that you're talking to somebody that represents your audience. The thing is, you don't actually have to talk to that many people, right? There's analysis paralysis, right? You can go out and talk to 1,000 people, and you're going to get quickly diminishing returns on how much insight you're going to glean. But I'm going to get more insight from if I have a product that is for house painters, I'm going to get more insight talking to 2 house painters, 5 house painters than I am going to be when I talk to 500 accountants. Right. Like there's the problem is we often, if I'm an accountant, if I'm making the software, well, I know most accountants. Like that's who it would be, is that the people in my professional network are going to be accountants. The people who I see at these conferences and whatever are accountants. And so that's who they go around asking. And it's really easy to get trapped in that bubble where we think, well, all the feedback I'm getting is really great, but I'm not getting relevant feedback. It's important that you're talking to somebody that's like your audience. The absolute best thing, the best tool is, this thing, your phone, right? Like if you go out and talk to people, just give a ring, right? I mean, at some point, if you maybe a house painter, maybe you just Google a house painter, right? And like, I want to go and and pick someone's brain and say, hey, I'll pay you $20 if you can talk to me for a few minutes here. That's going to be so much more effective than
hang out at Home Depot for a couple hours and just watch the people come and go hang out by the paint
outside
section.
I've worked on projects where I've had to stand on the concourse at Grand Central Terminal and flag people down because I needed to talk to tourists. So that's what I did. I would go stand and I would talk to tourists.
It's crazy how nuts and bolts, things can get, and people want to rely so heavily on technology now to do the heavy lifting for them. And it's like sometimes you just have to get out there and use that shoe leather and get to the place that you need to be and go actually physically get it done. Because sometimes that's that's getting out of your comfort zone, and sometimes that's the thing that's going to have you set apart. If like you said, 90% of the people that listen to this, 90% of the people that are taking this to heart, and I'm like, I can really change my message, I can really create something powerful here, are going to skip this part, be that 10% that doesn't. Actually go through and actually get out there and find those people and talk to them. Like Ben said, find two. You could do anything twice. Almost anything. All right, so that brings us to the last attribute, Ben. The one, and we alluded to this pretty strongly before, keep it minimal. So now we've gone through these 4 other attributes, and we're at the closure of this. So let's dive back into how to keep your message minimal. What's the importance?
Yeah. So minimal is have you cut out everything you don't need and kept what is necessary? Is it everything you need but only what you need? And we talked a second ago about the Think, Don't Smoke and the Truth campaign. What's interesting about that is that's a great illustration of what we're not trying to do necessarily is to get to the fewest number of words or sentences or paragraphs or pages or slides or whatever other metric it is. We're trying to get to the least amount of friction. We're trying to eliminate all the bumps in the road that might prevent somebody from getting from here to there. Because every time there is that bump in the road, every time there is that kind of thing that stops you, well, it's another opportunity to pull off. It's an off-ramp. It's for somebody to say, I don't really care about this anymore. I don't want to buy this thing. I don't want to go sign up for your thing. I don't want to go vote for your guy. And there's plenty of opportunity for us to place our finite attention somewhere else, and we're going to. My background, I mentioned before, is in design. If you ask a user experience designer about friction, this is what they work in. You put friction up before the things you don't want people to do, and you eliminate friction between the things that you want people to do. If you want something, this is what they call a dark pattern. If you're trying to unsubscribe from something, if you're trying to cancel your subscription to like a newspaper, you got to like jump through all these hoops and, click on a small little tiny button somewhere, maybe give them a phone call or send them a letter. Or anybody who's tried to quit at gym will understand kind of how much of a pain in the ass this is. But if you want to buy something, well, they eliminate all the friction for that, right? They eliminate, it's real. It's one click, or it's 4 easy payments, or whatever it is. Hey, my credit card's already saved. Those friction points drop away, and it becomes really easy to get to where you want to go. So that's what we're talking about with minimal. It's correlated with shorter, but it is not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, it's not the shortest possible. That's just like you said, that's where Think Don't Smoke probably got lost up, and just like feeling that brevity was so powerful and so to the point, and it completely blew up in their faces. One thing I just, again, the vet in me always goes to your use of the examples from the military side, and this is something we see the old propaganda posters up in like every military hall of like excellence. We have like these different schools of excellence based on every branch in the Army. So I was in intel on the second half of my career, and so at the intelligence school of excellence down in Sierra Vista, they had these all over those 1940s, 1930s posters with like the women when they had the red bandanas and like they're flexing their arms, and then behind them there's like a ship that's sinking, and it would be loose lips sink ships, and it's like, it's so perfectly to the point. Loose lips sink ships, and it's just, how could you get more clear and concise in fewer words versus the other example that you gave, which was actually from the War Department, which is don't discuss troop movements, ship sailings, or war equipment. It's like,
oh yeah,
well, yeah.
And
But,
loose lips sink ships, bit of a tongue twister, but it's a good example of the aesthetic qualities of a message actually affect how we perceive that message. So there's a rhyme, there's kind of some visual language as part of that. And so we're much more likely to think that's true, to think that's, to internalize that, to remember that, as opposed to the more kind of dry and in many ways kind of complicated, well, don't discuss troop movements, ship sailings, and war equipment. Well, I have to understand what each of those words mean, what each of those, kind of collection of syllables, and how is it going to stick in my head? Those extra beats are friction, right? It's okay. So troop movements. What's a troop movement? Is it this or is it that? Does this count as this? But by eliminating the friction, which is here's the general rule here, which is loose lips sink ships. It's also tying in a consequence, right? So you're saying, well, it's not just do something, but there's the benefit. The benefit is that you don't sink the ships.
right. Absolutely. Ben, you've written an incredibly powerful book, and I really appreciate the fact that in the writing of the book, even with the length itself, you stayed true to the principle of the book. I think it was less than 200 pages. I think it was 198 pages on Kindle at least. And that's where I had the chance to consume it, and so it was a great opportunity to be able to go through and not take on a full college text book, 798 pages of every single historical component that could be used to describe simplicity in messaging, overly done in an overly complicated manner. So it was really well executed.
Thank you.
Of course. Is there any other messages from the book that you wanted to make sure to share, or even an overarching just kind of message from it that you wanted to share with the audience?
Well, I think we covered a ton of ground here, which I really appreciate, and thank you for the insightful questions and this great discussion. The other thing you mentioned there at the end, though, about the book being kind of succinct and short. This is my only piece of advice. I wouldn't recommend anybody writes this book again, because the problem with writing a book about simplicity and about communicating simply is that everything you do is going to get judged against that, right? So the title, the subtitle, the cover design, the back jacket, all these different things. So had to be really careful about all those pieces. This is totally a book you should judge by its cover, and if it's not something that I achieved there, then you know what? Then I probably failed in this.
You definitely didn't. It's hard to come across a book that has so many powerful practical applications inside of it in such a short style book, and it brings in some of the more effective strategies that some of these books, some books, very few, but some books are putting in now, which are actually action oriented section ends. And so when you get to the end of a section, oftentimes when I'm reading a book, I find myself at the end of it and I'm like, okay, well, now I'm getting ready to ingest this whole next part of this book. And I don't really have, other than my, dog earing and highlighting and having to go back and remember where all the notes are and everything, there's not really a consolidated way to extract the information or the importance from this. And you do that. For the reader, you create the power questions that they can take from that section of the book and apply directly to either their next considered marketing message or the marketing message that they're using right now. And they can start vetting what they're doing against these in the sections of the book. So it's not just, hey, here's a historical lesson and this is why this matters and this is why you should care. It's like it's actually useful. And that is in the world of 2023, as we shift into 2024, we need more of that.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. That's high praise coming from you.
Of course, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to get a hold of you, if people want to get the book, where do they go to do so?
So again, thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it. You can find more about me, more about my book. Go to benguttmann.com. There's 2 T's and 2 N's, or just kind of Google Ben Guttmann. Simply put, it'll come up. Books available wherever books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And if you're interested, there's a free chapter of it. You can go grab on my website. Just head on over. It'll be a big fat button for it. And if this has been something that's been useful to you, I'd love to hear how it's impacted you. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to connect.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate it. This was amazing, and I can't thank you enough for coming and being a part of our Marketing Mastery series here on the Business Breakthrough Podcast.